I fully anticipate that if we continue to see more jobless claims than anticipated, and that number keeps climbing, that we could be in for lower rates sooner than we're expecting.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Mortgage Minute. My name is Matt Thomas, and I am joined by co-host Brian Dewald. We're going to jump into Mortgage Minute. Today, we're going to be talking about what we're seeing in December in terms of the rates and things that are affecting the rates. Brian's going to speak specifically on the two largest components of what's affecting rates, good or bad. He also is going to bring up an interesting statistic about a number that we haven't seen in about 4 years. And then we'll take a look at what 2025 looks like. Brian's going to break out his crystal ball. Brian, why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Here we are, approaching mid-December. Today is the 12th of December, 2024. And, for the month so far, mortgage rates have been overall looking pretty good. The last couple of days has been a little bumpy. This is a big week for a lot of data coming out, right? There's a bunch of inflation reports. There's a bunch of job reports. And when we mentioned, when you opened up, just the two major factors that affect rates, those are them, right? It's inflation and employment data. So this week's been a bit of a yo-yo, just a little bit of up and down. Inflation numbers weren't all that favorable, but the jobless reports came in higher than anticipated, which has been sort of the yin to the yang. So, if all of that news is short of expectation, we tend to see a little bit better interest rates when inflation is a little higher, and that came in right as we expected, but it's still a higher figure. But the jobless figure came in higher than expected, which is great for bonds, right? Particularly mortgage bonds. So, as we see that inflation coming up isn't really favorable for the mortgage world, but it's been countered by the news of higher jobless claims than that were anticipated. So,
sure. Well, it's interesting that we've had an interesting fall. We had a month where things really improved, and the people who jumped on that got rates into the fives, and in the low to mid sixes. Then we saw rates really tick up with a lot of things going on. We saw a lot of people kind of sort of standing on the sidelines from a just taking action standpoint with the election, which is typical. It happens every election cycle. But if you look at the overall trend lately in December, it sounds like it's been going down with the exception of little volatility over the last couple of days, which is normal. So hopefully we're still trending in a good direction. Brian, you mentioned that there was a statistic that we haven't seen in 4 years. What's that all about?
Yeah, we're approaching the highest count of jobless claims in the last 4 years. So I fully anticipate that if we continue to see more jobless claims than anticipated, and that number keeps climbing, that we could be in for lower rates sooner than we're expecting.
Well, that would certainly be great. I know there's going to be renewed vigor and interest in the real estate market, probably like it does most years. Certainly when we start to get into the January, people have settled in after the holidays and they focus on what the spring is going to bring, again, holidays behind everybody. So I think we're going to see some interesting things happen, especially if rates really start to decrease.
Agreed.
We've talked about it. It's all just speculation, but man, it would really light the real estate world on fire. And, that's good, I guess, if you're buying in terms of, favorable rates, but the competition goes up and, now it becomes, does that favor the sellers? So interesting to see.
Yeah, and to kind of go off on a tangent, you and I have spoken about this before, so maybe you can find a link and post it below. But there's a website, you and I both talked about this, called Keeping Current Matters, and it talks about, the relation to presidential election years, and it doesn't have anything to do with who won or who lost, but it's, real estate tends to take a downturn during the election cycle, right, kind of end of summer. And
I think it's a 15% setback is what it typically is.
Yep.
Not in prices, but activity, right?
Activity.
Transactions and such.
Yep. And from the report, if I recall, just a couple months ago, I read it, but it was talking about the spring after, right? And every cycle, every spring post-election cycle, short of 2008, right? That was a rough year for real estate. So if we take that out of the equation, every other post-election spring has been very favorable. So, if all of that comes together and aligns with rates coming down a little bit, we could be in for a little bit of a wild ride, which would be fun.
Right. Well, you get all that certainty, right? Whether you like the the president-elect or you don't, at least you know who it is. People
Right.
settle in, there's not so much focus. You're not getting blown up with all the political text. No, people are just
Right.
uncertain in those times.
True.
But once spring rolls around, and when we talk spring, we're talking about real estate spring. Real estate spring
Yeah.
is about a month away.
Yep.
And with certainty, again, whether you like the administration or you don't, people are going to be making their decisions based on what they know rather than what they're anticipating or what they think might happen or
Great
just
point.
feeling unsettled in general. So,
Yep.
yeah, and it's a postponement of things that they might have done in the fall had things been different. So that maybe even adds a little bit of volume is what that same report shows. So it'll be
Yep.
interesting to see, with the exception of that one cycle, you see a lot of sort of extra activity. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Agree.
Brian, everybody wants to know, and everyone seems to be chiming in, whether they feel like they know, whether they don't know, but everyone wants to know what is going to happen in 2025. And I feel like if there was one thing that you could pick up from this show for the many years we've been doing this already, it is that there is no way to truly predict what mortgage rates are going to do.
True.
However, everyone's got an opinion, and this time of year, everyone's got what's going to happen in 25 outlook. So why don't you give us your version of that, and you can put as many disclaimers in as you feel like.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is a crystal ball, right? And I'll revert back and look at both sides of that. A couple of years ago, Fannie Mae's chief economist thought rates were going to be in the fives, right? And that never happened. So, all we're doing is forecasting and looking at data and history and that kind of a thing. So, but the general consensus around our industry with a lot of the folks that I follow truly believe that rates are going to get better. I think the data can be, let's call it illustrated better. When I say data, I mean employment news, right? The one of the biggest factors, again, getting back to the earlier part of the conversation with mortgage rates, is data for employment. And that has been so skewed over the last, year to two that even further, perhaps, that I think that might get fixed. It kind of seems, and it's hinting that might happen. So, if the employment data is giving to the Fed and to the mortgage world and the whole world accurately, I think we could see some better rates just based on that. Couple that with inflation, if that's going to, they're kicking and clawing and screaming and scratching to get that down. If that happens, that'll help rates. And of course, if jobless claims continue to rise, all of those factors will contribute to lower interest rates. So, a lot of wishful thinking if all of that comes together, but the consensus around our industry from crystal ball fortune teller winners is that a lot of those things are going to happen over the next, 6-12 months, whatever that looks like.
So it's just more of a reality focused reporting of the numbers, right?
Yes.
It's essentially what's happening. And
Yes.
again, not to make it any political thing, but as we're going in, when we're in election year, as things approach an election year, there's some belief, obviously, that there's some manipulation of how things
Sure.
are reported and whatnot. And so we're not speculating necessarily on that. But the point is, if it gets reported in a more realistic way, it doesn't necessarily change what's going on in the economy. It just
Right.
changed the way that people feel about the way it's being reported. And if it feels more realistic or more accurate, maybe that helps tell a more realistic story. Maybe we need to be a little bit more cautious with our economy, and therefore, rates need to, come down. So as a reaction,
Yep.
is that
I
essentially
agree.
what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Everyone's been optimistic about rates, kind of getting better and improving. But again, with pent up demand from, election season and just generally moving into the springtime, certainly about a month from now is when we see that tick up usually. It'll be interesting to see how things, get kicked off here. So until then, we'll sign off. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds great. Thanks again.